Welcome to The Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here today because we're tackling a fascinating topic that honestly every single one of us has experienced firsthand. Have you ever met someone who is just so intensely confident that you almost start to doubt yourself just by being in the same room as them? You know exactly the type I'm talking about. It's the person who hasn't even skimmed the project brief but confidently speaks first in the meeting anyway. The kind of person who walks into a room like they literally own the building, speaks like they've already won the game, and makes plans like failure is just something that happens to other people. At first glance, it looks incredibly powerful, right? It might even be kind of inspiring to watch. But as we're about to uncover, what looks like absolute strength on the surface usually hides a massive psychological trap.
So we really need to ask ourselves this direct question. Is this behavior actually confidence, or is it something else entirely? Because if you watch these incredibly certain people over time, something really strange happens. You start noticing a pattern. They begin to lose out on opportunities they were clearly perfect for. They suddenly lose that huge promotion to the quiet, observant listener sitting in the corner. They burn bridges without even realizing those relationships mattered. And the most defining trait of all, somehow they always have a perfectly crafted, bulletproof reason why absolutely none of it was their fault.
To understand why this happens, we kind of have to step inside their head for a minute. You see, from the inside, overconfidence doesn't actually feel like a flaw. It doesn't feel like a mistake or an oversight. It feels like total clarity. It feels like absolute certainty and control. The person genuinely thinks, I know exactly what I'm doing. Even when reality is standing right in front of them, quietly trying to say otherwise, that unshakable feeling of certainty just acts like an impenetrable mental shield against the truth.
All right, let's dive right into Section 1, the illusion of certainty.
Human psychology has this really weird quirk, and it's called illusory superiority. Basically, this is a cognitive bias where we totally overestimate our own abilities compared to reality. For example, did you know that roughly 80% of drivers believe they're above average behind the wheel? Mathematically, that's impossible. No way! But it perfectly illustrates the point. In simple terms, the more familiar we are with something, the more our brains incorrectly assume we're experts at it. Familiarity breeds a really dangerous false sense of mastery.
Now, you'd think our brains would be perfectly calibrated to measure our actual skill level, right? But they aren't. Our brains actually have a completely broken measurement system. Instead of measuring our actual skill, they just measure our confidence. And to our minds, confidence feels exactly like the truth. Because of these crossed wires, a person starts firmly believing, hey, I don't need your advice, I already understand this, I can completely figure it out myself.
The crucial point here is captured beautifully in this simple psychological truth. The mind rewards certainty more than doubt. This is absolutely essential to grasp. Overconfident people aren't necessarily careless or malicious. They're literally just following their own brain's reward system. Certainty feels safe. It feels satisfying. Doubt, on the other hand, feels vulnerable and super uncomfortable. So the brain takes the path of least resistance, rewarding that cozy feeling of knowing over the really hard work of questioning.
Which brings us to Section 2, when confidence stops listening.
Look, healthy confidence is actually highly flexible. It has the strength and humility to say, hey, I might be wrong here, or let me double check that. But overconfidence, it does something incredibly toxic. It acts as a permanent shield against feedback. Slowly, advice just starts sounding like disrespect. Constructive criticism feels like complete ignorance to them. Differing opinions are instantly treated as competition. The person literally divides the entire world into people who get it and people who don't.
And the moment a person stops learning, they start just repeating themselves. But because they're so deeply certain, that repetition, it feels like expertise to them. They become trapped on this mental hamster wheel, running furiously, sweating, and confusing all that exhaustion with actual forward progress. They think they're honing their craft, when in reality, they're completely trapped in stagnation.
Let's move on to Section 3, the trap of early success. Okay, here is the truly dangerous part about all of this. Overconfident people rarely fail loudly right at the beginning. In fact, their overconfidence actually works in their favor at first. They speak with incredible boldness in interviews, they negotiate aggressively, and they take these wild risks that other sensible people completely avoid. And sometimes, it actually pays off. That aggressive negotiation gets a short-term win, which the brain falsely logs as this genius strategy. These early wins totally reinforce their belief that this is who I am and man, this perfectly works.
But if you take away just one thing from this explainer today, let it be this. Luck is not a repeatable system. Psychology shows us time and time again that early wins do not always equate to a correct strategy. Sometimes they just mean you had incredibly lucky timing.
Mistaking a lucky coin flip for psychic powers sets you up for a massive fall. The overconfident person mistakes that blind luck for pure genius, which means they are completely, hopelessly unprepared when the luck inevitably runs out.
That takes us right into Section 4, the ego protection system. So what happens when an opportunity is finally missed or a relationship breaks because they absolutely refuse to adjust? Well, psychology offers a pretty brutal truth. The ego's main job is not truth. Its job is protection. When reality threatens a person's self-image, the mind doesn't just logically accept it. No way. It automatically, unconsciously rewrites the entire story to protect the ego.
Instead of viewing a failure as valuable information to be learned from, the ego instantly acts like a relentless PR machine, just spinning excuses. It says, oh, they just didn't recognize my value, or the system was totally rigged against me, or I was just too advanced for that situation. Suddenly, failure is stripped of all its educational value. It just becomes this tireless exercise in assigning blame to everyone else. Each excuse fiercely protects their identity, but it absolutely destroys their growth.
And this leads directly into what we call the isolation effect. It's basically a tragic three-step pipeline. First, the person refuses to listen to advice. Second, friends and mentors don't actively fight them. And honestly, this is the most heartbreaking part. They don't leave in some fiery argument. They just get totally exhausted and quietly fade away. They stop giving feedback altogether. And finally, step 3, because the feedback stops, the opportunities quietly disappear. From the inside, the overconfident person thinks nothing is wrong, but from the outside, we see them becoming totally isolated inside their own cage of certainty.
You know what the strangest irony of this entire phenomenon is? The people most affected by this are often highly intelligent and highly capable individuals. But capability without reflection simply becomes assumption. An assumption entirely replaces learning. These folks don't stop progressing because they aren't smart enough. They stop progressing because the thought of admitting they don't know something literally feels worse to them than actual failure. They are paralyzed by their own certainty.
Finally, let's look at Section 5, the quiet turning point. So how does it end? Well, the illusion usually shatters when reality becomes simply too consistent for the ego to ignore anymore. The reality check comes in the form of a heavily missed promotion, a failure pattern that repeats so many times it's undeniable, or just a rare moment of pure honest self-reflection brought on by sheer exhaustion. The person is finally just too tired to keep blaming the entire world. And that rock bottom, that pure exhaustion, is actually the necessary catalyst for breaking the mental shield.
In that quiet moment of exhaustion, something profoundly beautiful shifts in the mind. The internal narrative completely changes. They finally stop asking toxic questions like, why didn't they choose me? And they ask the ultimate growth question, what am I missing? Let me tell you, that single subtle change in questioning shifts their entire trajectory.
Because here is the bottom line. Blind spots are dangerous not because you see nothing, but because you absolutely believe you see everything. Confidence is not the enemy here, folks. We need confidence. It's powerful, it's driving, and it's totally essential. But the absolute second your confidence stops questioning itself, it transforms from a massive strength into a blinding cage. The real superpower isn't unwavering confidence. It's the ability to stay humble enough to keep learning, even when you are deeply, deeply convinced you already know the answer. The people who grow the most, achieve the most, and live the most fulfilling lives aren't the most confident, they are the most relentlessly curious. So, I'm going to leave you with this. The next time you walk into a room absolutely 100% certain that you have all the answers, ask yourself, are you seeing the whole picture, or are you just staring straight into your own blind spot? Thanks for joining me on this explainer. Stay curious, and I'll see you in the next one.